Good evening, everybody. Hi, Mary. All right, well, let's get to it tonight. We're in lesson 8. Get everything talking to each other. There we go. Makes me want to sing the Toys R Us theme song, but I don't want to grow up is the title of it tonight. Rudy says hi. Hi, Rudy. He's watching online with us, so. All right, so let me pull this up here, and we'll get right into Joseph. Particularly his brothers this week is what we're focusing on. There we go. Genesis chapter 43 says, "And the famine was sore in the land, and it came to pass, when they had eaten up the corn, which they had brought out of Egypt, their father said unto them, Go again, buy us a little food. And Judah spake unto him, saying, The man did solemnly protest unto us, saying, Ye shall not see my face, except your brother be with you. If thou wilt send our brother with us, we will go down and buy thee food. But if thou wilt not send him, we will not go down. For the man said unto us, Ye shall not see my face, except your brother be with you. And Israel said, Yet a brother. And they said, The man asked us straitly of our state and of our kindred, saying, Is your father yet alive? Have ye another brother? And we told him according to the tenor of these words. Could we certainly know that he would say, Bring your brother down? And Judah said unto Israel his father, Send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and thou and also our little ones. I will be surety for him. Of my hand shalt thou require him. If I bring him, then let me bear the blame forever. For except we had lingered, surely now we had returned this second time. And their father Israel said unto them, If it must be so now, do this. Take of the best fruits in the land in your vessels, and carry down the man a present, a little balm and a little honey, spices and myrrh, nuts and almonds. And take double money in your hand, and the money that was brought again in the mouth of your sacks, carry it again in your hand, peradventure it was an oversight. Take also your brother, and arise, go again unto the man, and God Almighty give you mercy before the man, that he may send away your other brother and Benjamin. If I be bereaved of my children, I am bereaved. And the men took that present, and they took double money in their hand, and Benjamin, and rose up, and went down to Egypt, and stood before Joseph. And when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the ruler of his house, Bring these men home, and slay, and make ready, for these men shall dine with me at noon. And the man did as Joseph bade, and the man brought the men into Joseph's house. And the men were afraid, because they were brought into Joseph's house, and they said, Because of the money that was returned in our sacks at the first time are we brought in, that he may seek occasion against us, and fall upon us, and take us for bondmen and our asses. And they came near to the steward of Joseph's house, and they communed with him at the door of the house, and said, O sir, we came indeed down at the first time to buy food. And it came to pass, when we came to the inn, that we opened our sacks, and behold, every man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight, and we have brought it again in our hand. And other money have we brought down in our hands to buy food. We cannot tell who put our money in our sacks. And he said, Peace be to you, fear not. Your God and the God of your father hath given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money. And he brought Simeon out unto them. And the man brought the men into Joseph's house, and gave them water, and they washed their feet, and he gave their asses provender. And they made ready the present against Joseph, came at noon, for they heard that he should eat bread there. And when Joseph came home, they brought him the present which was in their hand into the house, and bowed themselves to the earth. And he asked them of their welfare, and said, Is your father well, the old man of whom ye spake? Is he yet alive? And they answered, Thy servant, our father, is in good health, he is yet alive. And they bowed down their heads, and made obeisance. And he lifted up his eyes, and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, Is this your younger brother, of whom ye spake unto me? And he said, God be gracious unto thee, my son. And Joseph made haste, for his bowels did yearn upon his brother, and he sought where to weep, and he entered into his chamber, and wept there. And he washed his face, and went out, and refrained himself, and said, Set on bread. They set on for him by himself, and for them by themselves, and for the Egyptians, which did eat with him by themselves, because the Egyptians might not eat bread with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination unto the Egyptians. And they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth, and the men marveled one at another. And he took and sent messes unto them from before him, but Benjamin's mess was 5 times so much as any of theirs, and they drank and were merry with him. Well, after years of wrongdoing, some pretty colorful past here, some seared consciences, Joseph's brothers finally begin to come around. They finally begin to make some progress. Judah, in particular, starts showing some signs of maturity as he prepared with his brothers to go back to Egypt, where Joseph was waiting for him. Now, we shouldn't rely on age to bring spiritual growth and maturity. I'm sure you understand this, but age does not necessarily mean maturity. And how long you've been saved doesn't necessarily indicate how mature you are spiritually either. Maturity and growth come as we care for others. It comes as we accept responsibility for ourselves. It comes as we allow God to be in control of our lives. And so tonight we're going to look at how Judah grows in the area of spiritual maturity. We're going to look and identify 4 key areas of spiritual maturity together. And then we should all be challenged to choose a mature walk with God instead of refusing to grow up, if you will. You know, many of us have had at least one experience of having to eat at the small table with the younger kids. This always happened to me at Thanksgiving. My grandmother's dining room table and the dining room itself was never big enough for the entire family, so there was always off somewhere one of those old square card tables, you know, with folding chairs that the poor little kid on their knees would go thunk and get folded up in, you know. So there was always the kids' table off to the side, and it always got to the point where you just longed to not be at the kids' table anymore. There was that awkward time, you know, where you're just, man, you're way beyond these little kids, but you're not quite the adult yet. You wanted to sit there at the adult table. You wanted to engage in adult conversation. You wanted to be one of the adults. But what if you never outgrew that kids' table? What if you're still having to sit with the 8-year-olds that are spilling their punch and dropping their food all over the floor, and even though you're 30, 40, 50, I won't keep going. What if you never grew up? At some point, people would tell you, listen, you know, you shouldn't be sitting over there anymore. Come over here with the adults. You know, although the Bible doesn't record anyone telling Joseph's brothers to grow up, in Genesis 43, we see that after years of lacking leadership, after years of failing to take responsibility for themselves and for their actions, after years of neglecting to show care for anyone besides themselves, being selfish and jealous, these men were finally in a position to start behaving like men and grow up. So we see, first of all, tonight, Judah's growth. Judah's growth. We don't know a lot about the backstory of many of Joseph's brothers, but God takes some time to record a few details about Judah's life for us. And it's found in Genesis chapter 38, and it's not flattering. It's not a flattering story. Judah was a man that failed his own family. He failed as a father. He failed as a husband. The Bible says in Genesis 38 that his firstborn son was so evil that the Lord killed him, that his second son was also disobedient, so the Lord killed him too, and Judah himself fell into moral failures. And so in Genesis 43, it's interesting that out of all the brothers here, Judah is the one that shows some growth, some maturity. We see, first of all, he shows an awareness for others. It's been some time now since they got back from Egypt, since they came home with all of the food that Joseph had given them, but it's been long enough that the food has run out. And just like before, Jacob has to tell his sons to get ready to go so that they can go back to Egypt and buy some more food. But this time, the brothers were reluctant to go because Joseph's instructions were pretty specific. He said, "Do not come back unless you bring your younger brother with you, Benjamin." And the first time they told Jacob that, he refused to let Benjamin go. Reuben had vouched for the boy's safety. But the second time around, Judah himself spoke up and said, "Send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and thou, and also our little ones." His words show a change. He's not just thinking about himself anymore. He's thinking about the whole family. Before, it was Jacob that was concerned for the family, and now Judah's saying, "Dad, you've got to let me go so that the whole family will be okay, so that the whole family doesn't suffer and starve." He's not just thinking about himself. He's showing some concern for his family. It was a pretty dysfunctional family. I don't know if it gets much worse than Jacob's family. They sold their brother into slavery. Judah's children were so evil that God killed them. Rather than, think about this, Simeon's still back in Egypt, and they're just biding their time. They're not in really much of a hurry. He's not even mentioned here at all that they need to go back and get him. They're just content to let him stay instead of seeing Joseph again without their younger brother. But Judah seems like he's finally coming around. He shows an awareness for others. He's concerned about others. And we need to understand this as well, and to do this in our own life. We need to show care and concern for our own families. You know, a lot of times we're gracious to our friends, we're gracious to our coworkers, we're gracious to people at church, and then when we walk through the doors of our home, we're ugly or unkind to our own families. We really know how to hurt each other inside the family unit. We know just the right thing to say. We'll be willing to forgive a friend, but we hold a grudge against a family member for a long period of time. If you want to be spiritually mature, then be concerned about your family. Care for your family. Prefer your family. Be kind to your family members. Be obedient and respectful. If you still have parents, if you still have grandparents, respect them and honor them. God desires that we would care for our families. Exodus 20 verse 12 says, "Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee." 1 John 4:20 says, "If a man say, I love God, and hateth his brother, he's a liar. For he that loveth not his brother whom he hath seen, how can he love God whom he hath not seen?" In Galatians 5:22 it says, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, goodness, faith, and gentleness, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law. We need to show concern and awareness for others, particularly those in our own family. We also see that Judah accepted responsibility. He accepted responsibility. He says, "I will be surety for him. Of my hand shalt thou require him, if I bring him not unto thee, and set him before thee, then let me bear the blame forever." A surety in our day is what we think of as a bond or a security deposit. Judah was saying, "Listen, Dad, I will be held responsible if anything happens to Benjamin." In Genesis 42, Reuben tried to make a deal with his father as well, but his offer was a little bit different and kind of strange. It says in Genesis 42, Reuben says, "Dad, slay my 2 sons if I bring him not to thee. Deliver him into my hand, and I will bring him to thee again." So Reuben's offer was, "Dad, just kill 2 of your grandsons if I don't bring Benjamin back." He was never going to do that. I don't think that Reuben was completely genuine. I think it was one of those, hyperboles, one of those things that you say just to be persuasive. He didn't really mean it. But Judah, he was willing to take the blame and responsibility himself. He says, "Dad, I'll be responsible for Benjamin." He goes further and he says, "For except we had lingered, surely now we had returned this second time. We've wasted far too much time already. We could have been there and back by now. We need to get going." Until this point, all the evidence in the scriptures indicates that Judah wasn't a very good guy. He was certainly a selfish individual. He's not the kind of man that takes responsibility. He's not the kind of guy that would shift blame or that would avoid an opportunity to shift blame on somebody else. He was the kind of guy that would connive and lie and keep secrets rather than deal in the truth. But here we see him taking responsibility for his own younger brother Benjamin. He's going to protect Benjamin like he never protected Joseph. Well, in a similar way, immature Christians aren't interested in being responsible or taking responsibility. They'd rather be left alone to do or not do as they please. Immature people don't want their own responsibility. They don't want to own the responsibility to their families, to their church. They'd rather just do what they want to do, waste time, forget about being productive. Do that sometime down the road. Just stop bugging me about it right now. The time for not accepting responsibility is long in the past. Children are the ones that refuse to own up to the things they need to do. Adults welcome responsibility. 1 Corinthians 13 says, "When I was a child, I spake as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things." Adults accept responsibility for themselves and for the other people that God places in their lives. Children shy away from responsibility. So we see Judah accepts responsibility here for Benjamin. He's concerned. He cares for his family. So secondly tonight, notice also the brother's guilt. The brother's guilt. Years ago, the San Diego Union Tribune reported a story about two men that were on trial for armed robbery. During the questioning of an eyewitness to the crime, the mood was pretty intense. And the prosecutor asked the witness, "You were at the scene when the robbery took place, is that correct?" "Yes." "And you reported seeing a vehicle flee the scene at a high rate of speed, correct?" "Yes." "And did you observe the occupants of the vehicle?" "Yes, two men." "And," the prosecutor boomed out, "are those two men present in the court today?" Before the eyewitness could say anything, the two defendants raised their hands, sealing their own fate. Have you ever been minding your own business, think back to school, and all of a sudden you had to go down to the principal's office? A lot of uncertainty in that. Guilt in the pit of your stomach. What in the world did I do? You're walking your way there, and you're racking your brain trying to figure out if you were in trouble for something, if you had done something, and even if you hadn't done anything wrong, you still felt a little guilty. Maybe I did something and I just didn't realize it. You probably think a similar thing when the blue and red lights go off in your rear view mirror. Oh man, what did I do? And you feel guilty. Drive past the officer and you check your speed limit or speed real quick. As the brothers reached Egypt, this time they meet the officers there, and they find out they're going directly to Joseph's house. They're not standing in the food line anymore. They were called directly to the house of the second in command of the most powerful nation at the time. That wasn't a good thing in their minds. It says, and the men were afraid because they were brought into Joseph's house. They remembered they had found their own money in the food sacks and thought, we are about to get in big trouble. They felt fear. Way back in lesson 2, we talked about a hardened heart. We talked about a seared conscience. A seared conscience doesn't feel guilt. It doesn't get convicted about doing wrong. It's seared. It seems that these men have done a little bit of growing because all of a sudden they're worried. They're afraid. They feel guilty. You might have heard somebody say, if you feel guilty, there's a good chance it's because you are guilty. These men were afraid because they were guilty. They hadn't done what they thought they were going to be accused of. They were innocent of theft, but they had hidden their sin in their lives. For years now, they had been telling a lie, and they were worried that somehow, some way, Joseph was going to make them pay for that. Proverbs 28, verse 1 says, "The wicked flee when no man pursueth, but the righteous are bold as a lion." When you're constantly hiding things in your life, you're going to live with paranoia that someone will find you out, that somebody's out to get you. You feel like you always have to watch your back, or that people are just one step away from finding out something you did. And that's not a fun way to live. It's a terrifying way to live. Feeling like you have to make sure your story always matches up so that you don't get caught in the lie. That's a miserable way to live. The only way to avoid a guilty conscience is to grow up and live in the truth. And only then will your conscience be clear. 1 Peter 3:16 says, "Having a good conscience, that whereas they speak evil of you as of evildoers, they may be ashamed that falsely accuse your good conversation in Christ." Acts 26, verse 16, "And herein do I exercise myself to have always a conscience void of offense toward God and toward men." These men were innocent of theft, but they had guilty consciences, that's for sure. And because of it, they felt fear. They also responded defensively. They responded defensively. They were pretty sure they were going to be accused of theft, and so the brothers try to plead their case with the steward before they go in before Joseph. They didn't want to give Joseph a chance to accuse them of stealing before they could get their side of the story out. And so they took the steward aside and they told him how they had found the money in their sacks and basically said, "Listen, we didn't steal it. You've got to believe us. We didn't do this." You know, so many times we reveal the true state of our hearts when we get defensive. We may not have done wrong this time. The accusation, whether actual or imagined, though, it can hit a little bit too close to home and we get on the defensive. What's your response when your pastor tells you, "Hey," or your Sunday school teacher, "Hey, we missed you last week"? Do you immediately go on the defensive? "Well, I've just been really busy," or "I've had a lot of work," or "Why doesn't that guy just mind his own business?" You know, watch how you respond to others when you feel like they might be accusing you of doing something wrong. If you're not guilty, there's no reason to get defensive. But if you feel yourself getting irritated or trying to defend yourself all the time before somebody can assume the worst, maybe there's something you need to get right. Maybe there's something you need to confess before God that's causing you to be defensive in other circumstances. Joseph's brothers responded defensively. They responded in fear because they had a guilty conscience. And then we also see Joseph's influence here. You ever been around somebody that was just so incredible? They had accomplished so much, or they just had an unbelievable depth of wisdom, or they were noticeably kind and compassionate to others. Maybe they had an amazing outlook on life. Whatever it was, you felt inspired to be a better person just by being around them, you know. Sometimes when we meet those people in our lives, we find ourselves copying them in subtle or not so subtle ways. We dress like them. We pick up a few of their favorite phrases. We read books that they would approve of, or things that they've mentioned. In various ways, these people rub off on us, and our opinions and our beliefs align with theirs. This is what happened to the people who met and spent time with Joseph. He was a man that was so faithful in his example as a servant of God, and his example of God's love and his wisdom, that people around him couldn't help but see that God was a priority in his life. And it is a pretty great testimony. And it's a testimony, too, that we can have, that people can look at our lives and see God reflected through us. Matthew 5:16 says, "Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven." Philippians 2:15 says, "That ye may be blameless and harmless, the sons of God without rebuke, in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation, among whom ye shine as lights in the world." And I want you to see, first of all, Joseph's influence, something that I found incredible and didn't necessarily think about before. But first of all, Joseph's faith impacted his household. Faith impacted Joseph's household. Think about this, all right? Joseph's steward, the brothers come to him, they tell their story, and then the steward says this, "Peace be to you, Fear not, your God and the God of your father hath given you treasures in your sacks. Basically, he's saying, relax. God's in control. God's the one that provided for you. God met that need. Want to know why I find that surprising? The man was an Egyptian from a polytheistic culture. They worshipped just about everything. And the man says, no, God provided that for you. Your God and the God of your father. He was telling them to trust in the one true God. You can be sure that this man did not learn about God because he had lots of churches in his community, or that somebody left a tract on his door, or that he heard a sermon on the radio. The only way this man could hear about God was through Joseph. You want to know one great test of whether you're growing in spiritual maturity? Look around you. Look at the people that you encounter, the people that you would list, that you influence. Look at the people that you interact with. Do your friends, your family members, your neighbors, these people, even the guy that you interact with just in business or in the store or whatever, do they know more about the God you serve because of your impact in their life, because of your testimony? Have their lives been in any way influenced for Christ because they saw him reflected through you? One thing the story of Joseph shows us is that faith is contagious. People around us should be able to tell that there's something different about us. They should know that God is the reason there's something different about us. They should want to be more like him because they see us becoming more like him and growing in him. John 13:35, Jesus said, "By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another." Ephesians 5 says, "Be ye therefore followers of God as dear children, and walk in love, as Christ also hath loved us, and hath given himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling savor." So Joseph's household, his servants, the people under him, they had faith in God because Joseph's faith impacted them. And then we see that faith also calmed his brothers' fears. Because Joseph was a man of faith, because Joseph was a man who feared God, he had no interest in being vindictive or being mean to his brothers. He was interested in showing them love. He was interested in enjoying their company. And they thought that his motive for bringing them into the house was so that he could terrorize them with false accusations, so that he could take everything from them, and even their lives as slaves. In reality, Joseph called them so that they could enjoy each other, so that they could celebrate. He directed his steward to prepare a feast. It says, "Make ready, for these men shall dine with me at noon." And while the brothers are fearfully spilling their guts before the steward, trying to get their story straight, the steward already knew what was waiting for them inside. He knew Joseph's intentions. He knew Joseph wasn't angry. And he said to them in verse 23, "Peace be to you, fear not." And once the brothers had this reassurance and had been reminded to trust God, that God was providing for them, you can find they enjoyed the feast. The chapter concludes with them sitting around the table, enjoying each other and enjoying Joseph's company. It says they drank and were merry with him. They had a good time. Fear and faith are connected. Fear and faith are connected. When we have great fear, we probably have small faith. But when we have great fear, when we have great faith, we find our fears are calmed. Jesus told a frightened man in Mark 5:36, "Be not afraid, only believe." And then he asked his disciples after they'd gone through a scary storm, he said, "Why are ye so fearful? How is it that ye have no faith?" As we grow in spiritual maturity, we'll find our fears are calmed. Perfect love casteth out fear. Faith conquers fear. And where our fears are calmed, as we learn that we shouldn't be relying on ourselves. We should be relying on the power and love of Christ. There's no reason to fear if we trust that God has a plan and wants what's best. We've got nothing to fear. It might have taken Joseph's brothers a long time before they finally decided to grow up, but at least we see them making some progress. And Joseph still had some testing to do. Good relationships require trust, and he wasn't quite sure they were trustworthy just yet. But their example in this chapter is a good start. It gave Joseph a glimpse into their hearts. How are you doing in the area of spiritual maturity? When it comes to spiritual matters, are you still sitting at the kids' table? Or are you ready for a seat with the grown-ups? You know, you can be mature in Christ. You can grow up in Christ. God has great plans for those that would grow in Him. 1 Corinthians 13:11 says, "When I was a child, I spake as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things." All right, we will pick up with Lesson 9 next time. Got some prayer requests for you tonight, and would appreciate any updates that you might have. The teach-outs are taking off tomorrow for Pennsylvania, and they'll be gone for 3 weeks. So we'll be praying for them for good travels and refreshing visits down there. Pamela's aunt, Brenda Petty, just found out she was just diagnosed with mesothelioma. Any other updates tonight? Yes, Mary? Okay. I don't think I know Marty Jansen. Is that a man or a woman? Marty is a man. Marty Jansen passed away, friend of the deaf. So be praying for the deaf. And does he have family? Okay. He's got a wife and kids too. Yeah. So I'm assuming that their kids are grown. So pray for that family, the Jansen family. Anything else? Yes. Okay. So be praying for Charlie. So Joel McConkey has to get a little healthier before he can resume his chemo treatments. He's how old? So be praying for Joel. He's about 11 years old, dealing with cancer. Chemo is postponed because he's not healthy enough at the moment. His counts are too low. So be praying for that. Praying for revival at the end of the month, next month. Not quite October. We're getting there. Time is crawling and flying all at the same time, Mary. So we're praying for that. The Thompsons are coming. And really looking forward to our time with them. They're he's a great preacher, challenging preacher, also a very talented family. You'll enjoy them very much. But just be praying for our church during that time. Be praying that folks would come out for that. Be praying that the family members and friends that we've been praying for would come out for that. I'd encourage you to make a concerted effort to invite people to come. I'm praying that we see people saved and we see people get back on track with the Lord, and we get stirred up here. So I'll be praying about all of that, and just make sure you mark off the time on your calendar there. Pray for David Brace. We got to see him on Sunday night. He came, he looked frail. looks very frail. So be praying for David and Phyllis. Any change with your nephew? All right. Anything else? Anything I'm forgetting? Enjoy over in the Philippines. Be praying for the Vilches family over there. And right now, they're still dealing with COVID pretty strongly over there, lockdowns and all that. The money issue is getting worked out. And so it just takes time. They're doing some test transfers and things like that. Nathan is pretty involved with that. And so on Sunday he said that it looks like it's going to work, but once they get everything all figured out and set up, then they've got a backlog of funds that have to be transferred over, and they can't transfer it all at once without things getting flagged and stuff like that. So it's going to be a little bit before they can get the funds where they need to go, but it looks like it'll work. So just be praying for that. Praying for that everybody involved would have good wisdom. Last thing you want is money tied up in cyberspace. So praying for Heidi Foudy, serving in our military. Been serving for quite a long time. I think she's a bird colonel, right? Is it the Army? Yep. Yeah. So she got to stop by and to greet us all a while back. That was pretty neat. Her son Gregory is also serving in the military. But be praying particularly for Heidi today. Margaret Breen is our shut-in. Be praying for them, all of our shut-ins, and then be praying for our country as well, and our governor. She needs the Lord. Last call. Anything I've forgotten or need to add or change? All right. We appreciate you being here tonight.